Welcome to the Caffeine stream on Caffeine and Philosophy.
Alright, hello everyone. Welcome to the Caffeine stream. My name is CB Robertson. This is episode, what is this, 55? 55. It's been a minute. It was a couple months now. I've been busy finishing up an essay for a compilation book coming out hopefully next month with the Order of Fire. A few essays that have already been out, including ones on science and the cattle of the sun. Should be great to have that in book format, and then a new one that's been really a couple years in the making. That will be pretty big. I chatted with it a little bit with Mr. Forrest Cooper over at Redacted Tactical, which should also be coming out next month, I think. So been staying busy studying for journeyman tests and stuff. But today we're not talking about any of that. We're not talking about justice or science or a little bit of science actually. Today we're talking about flat Earth theory. Now, the more I've looked at this question, the more I've come to really enjoy it. Because it's such a perfect, it's almost like a lab test environment to practice philosophy in. Now, the more you study philosophy and the breadth and variety of approaches that can be taken in philosophy, the harder it is, much like science, the harder it is to make some kind of system out of what is a real philosopher or what is not a real philosopher. What's doing real philosophy and what's not doing real philosophy. There isn't really an easy test. Philosophy is a lot more like an approach to, if not life, then at least to questions and to asking questions and difficult statements and things like that. There is a temptation to, when faced with, for example, political positions you don't like or views that you think are stupid, to dismiss them out of hand, to say, to call them annoying or they're obviously wrong or they're going against common sense. There's the sense that we shouldn't have to deal with this. Or perhaps, or even worse, society's in trouble when this is even a question. There's a lot of different ways that people put it, but there's a resistance to addressing certain questions that we don't like. Now, practically, for normal people just going about living their lives, there's something to this. It can actually be something like almost a form of abuse to force people to repeatedly deal with challenges to basic assumptions that they live their lives by. But this podcast isn't just about living your life normally. It's hopefully about developing some philosophical instincts, because at the end of the day, philosophy is not so much a method as it is an inclination. It's a kind of a spirit of approaching these questions that is guided by openness, but not acceptance. We have this great line from Plato's Republic where Socrates tells Glaucon, like, it's a noble and wonderful virtue to be able to entertain ideas without accepting them. And that really does summarize, I think, the ideal philosophical attitude. And there are a few benefits to taking this on. First of all, it can keep us more open-minded to correcting false views of our own. Perhaps what we think is obvious is actually wrong, and the thing we think is obviously wrong is in fact the correct position. It's not common, but it does happen. And so we open ourselves up to more correct positions. But even if our own initial view is correct and the alternative view that we might be contending with or evaluating is as obviously wrong as it appears, you can come to understand the arguments in defense of your own position better. You practice making arguments and articulating yourself, defending your position, which is a valuable skill. It can also be valuable to know specific arguments. This is especially important if you're going to be talking about God a lot, for example. There are some very specific historical arguments that keep getting made for God, against God. If you want to get into, apologetics, as a Christian or as an avid critic of Christianity, you should know what the problem of evil is. You should know what the ontological argument is, or the, argument from design. You should know you don't necessarily need to know the names of the arguments, although that can be helpful, but you should be familiar with some of the specific arguments. But more importantly, perhaps, you can learn the forms of these arguments. You can learn, this is why we call certain arguments logical fallacies. A logical fallacy doesn't describe just one particular argument. It's not only a fallacy when you call Bob wrong because he's got a fat head. It describes a whole category of arguments that attempt to to refute a point by criticizing the character of the person as an ad hominem. And you can also learn when logical fallacies don't apply, which is a whole other question. And logical fallacies don't always apply. There's a kind of logical fallacy that you can get into at certain levels. But anyways, I think the ultimate value individually in developing this skill is not just in addressing silly questions or trying to answer Zeno's paradox or trying to really think hard about the trolley problem or anything like that. It develops a kind of patience of personal character too, which can carry over to your relationships, either romantic or business or platonic, in a really positive way. So someone can, of course, be too open, too patient, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, because most people aren't suffering from that problem. So why flat Earth question? Why the question of the shape of the Earth? I have come to really like this question because the context of it is almost apolitical by definition. Like, who benefits? Politics, so much of politics is, guided by geographic interests or business interests. But the shape of the Earth and arguments over it, it's hard to imagine who could possibly benefit from it. And the sort of surrealness and the disconnectedness of the flat Earth hypothesis, as opposed to who did 9/11? That's a very political question. Or did the CIA do this, or did the Mossad do that? These all become very political and touch on biases and preferences and loyalties that we have in the real world. But flat Earth is it transcends all that, It's and so it's a interestingly easy place as a question to practice the suspension of disbelief and consider what appear to be absurd claims with a greater degree of openness, because we're freed from the sort of more mundane political biases that tend to pull our frontal cortex away from more objective evaluation by our heart or our stomach, as the case may be. So that's the reason why I like this question within the context of practicing being more like a philosopher in our approach to life and to questions and so forth. So there's a lot to say about this subject, and flat earthers make many, many different claims. But for the sake of symmetry and brevity, because I don't plan on making this a terribly long episode, I'm just going to present one argument by flat earthers, a flat earth argument. And any flat earther listening to this might be like, well, that's not the best argument. That's not the point. And likewise, I will present one counterclaim, which many, I'm sure, geologists or geographers or physicists will say is not the best counterpoint. But again, that's not the point. It's about looking at the sorts of claims and evaluating them relative to each other or to the question at hand. And I want to close with a bit of history that might tip my hat as to which direction I lean on the question. I guess, plot spoiler, I don't believe the Earth is flat. But my own beliefs shouldn't, ideally, prevent me from being able to look at these sorts of questions, if I'm doing my job well, with some seriousness and with sincerity. So we'll start off with a flat Earth claim. Now, there are many flat Earth claims, and a lot of them are fairly easy to dismiss. Like, we don't need to talk about, for example, the claims that many NASA photographs of the Earth are photoshopped. And we don't need to talk about that because the belief that the Earth is round predates not only NASA, but predates photography. Like, it was never built on that evidence. But it was built on mathematics, and it was built upon calculations that were done in the past, going back quite some ways. And so in July of last year, a certain rogue scientist named Den Blond Ulven, and I mean rogue with charity here. I enjoy these people. I think in many cases they're the ones who are doing real science. Did a very interesting experiment. He and I'll leave a link to his post on this because it's interesting to think about. He took a camera and a tripod to the edge of a large body of water. And he said, okay, here's the curvature of the Earth that everyone is talking about says I should lose, roughly 8 inches of height per 1 mile of distance. And it accelerates as you go further. So it's not just 16 inches at 2 miles, 24 inches at 3 miles. You gain, you lose more inches because the curve is curved. It's not a linear line. And so he did some quick math and said, this is how much vertically I should lose at the bottom of my shot as I look at objects over a very long distance with my very expensive camera across this lake. And he set up his camera on a clearish day, looked across the lake, and he said, interesting, I'm seeing way more than I should be able to see. How do we explain this? And that the flat earthers say, there is no curvature. See, here's the proof. You can literally look at it. It's a beautifully simple experiment. Very well designed, I think. So what do we make of this? Now, before I offer counter arguments, and I will offer counter arguments, I want to present in the style of a debate, the one argument for a round Earth, and that is the Coriolis effect. So, on the one hand, we see more than we should be able to see. How do we explain that? And then the round Earth person can say, well, here's a challenge. in the competitive shooting world, at extremely long distances, so distances greater than 1,000 yards, shooters have to take into account something called the Coriolis effect. And the Coriolis effect holds that after a bullet is fired from a gun, it's moving on its own, and the earth is rotating underneath it. It's not connected to the earth the way it was with the gun. So there is some retained inertia. It initially continues to move in the same direction as the earth, whether that's whether you're shooting east, west, north, south, doesn't matter. But beyond 1,000 yards, the separation of the bullet from the earth can cause the earth to drift further underneath the bullet, and you can shooters can miss by 3 inches, at 1,000 yards, or more beyond that. So it begins to matter. This depends on the speed of the bullet and the ballistic coefficient and so forth. And there are videos you can look at of guys, they take their rifle out and they shoot east and they shoot west, 1,000 yards in each direction, and voila, the rifle's dialed in to the same bullseye point, but on one side it's 3 or 4 inches high, and on the other side it's 3 or 4 inches low, because he's shooting east-west in that case. So how does the flat earther explain this Coriolis effect? So we've presented an argument for a flat earth, and again, these are not meant to be comprehensive. These are just one possible argument, and both sides have accumulated large numbers of arguments for their case. How would we deal with Mr. Ulvin's camera tripod? So far as I can tell, there are 4 possibilities, because possibility 1 is he just lied. there's Photoshop and stuff, and to anticipate, of course, the flat earthers could say, well, these videos demonstrating the Coriolis effect could also be lying. He aimed high to prove his point, or he aimed low to prove his point. Okay, that is a possibility. Let's take the possibility of just lying to prove a point off the table for a moment, though. With Den Blondolvin's camera setup, it is possible, perhaps, that he has demonstrated that the Earth is flat. But we'll call this possibility 1B. It's also possible that he's demonstrated the Earth is not flat, but is much larger than we believed it to be. Now, that would be a very strange mistake for humankind to have made for hundreds and hundreds of years. But we've done stranger mistakes in the past, and we've looked back on beliefs that were held for thousands of years and thought, well, that was silly, So it seems unlikely, but it's a possibility. Another possibility, and this is one that Mr. Ulvin actually addresses in his post, is, what about refraction? Because, and this has nothing to do with the shape of the Earth. We know that light can bend in certain contexts. There are mirages. There are, heat can do things, even at fairly low temperatures. Again, shooters are a great example of this. Shooters can see the bending of light over surfaces, whether that's sand or water or even dirt. So perhaps there could be some light bending that is permitting him to see things below the level that he would perhaps expect to be able to see them. So that's the second possibility. And the third possibility, which is the most, in some ways, the most annoying possibility, but also it's a very common thing to do in science among rogues and among professionals, is he just got his math wrong. He just applied the formula incorrectly, or he was given incorrect numbers on what the curvature of the Earth should be at certain places, or some kind of mathematical error of that kind. And there might be some other possibility that we're not considering. But the of the possibilities, incorrect math or refraction or the Earth is a lot larger than we thought it is. I kind of like the idea that the Earth is larger than we've always thought it. It doesn't seem likely, but it's possible. So that would be an initial brainstorming on how to deal with that. So what would the flat earthers say about the Coriolis effect? I think here it's a little tricky. Now, I've actually looked at some responses from flat earthers to Coriolis effect claims, because these people spend a lot of time going over these arguments, going over these ideas, trying to refine them, trying to really prove their point. And one of the claims they make is that the Coriolis effect actually doesn't exist at all. It's something they teach as a sort of byproduct of, physics doctrine from Newtonian physics and belief in the round Earth. But no sniper in the military actually employs this. People will learn it and try to account for it in ultra long range shooting, maybe to sort of flex and show how how long of a distance they're shooting. Oh, I have to employ the Coriolis effect, but it doesn't actually make any difference at all, because 3 or 4 inches of correction at 1,000 yards is going to completely drown in the 4 or 5 feet of correction that you're doing just because of the distance and gravity. So the distance, the difference is not just negligible, but becomes more negligible with every 100 yards further you're shooting. And professional snipers, the round earther could counter, well, professional snipers don't use the Coriolis effect because oftentimes their engagements are less than 1,000 yards, so it's not even doctrinal to use it. But the point that perhaps it's literally a vestigial belief that is never truly tested despite being implemented. And, a difference between a shooter shooting east to west versus shooting west east at 1,000 yard could be explained by a difference in the wind, even up or down. Who knows? So, and of course, you can imagine how the conversation would progress from there. So I just like bringing up those two arguments because they're it's a fun way of addressing the subject and really exploring the arguments in a like I was saying before, sort of unemotional manner. Now, I will take it to a slightly more emotional place, because to really address the subject, sometimes the arguments aren't sufficient and extra context can be helpful. The flat earthers will make this point with NASA and its less than pristine origins, perhaps. Where did these German scientists come from? But the same can be applied to the flat earth theory itself. There is an excellent video that I encourage people to watch if they're curious about the matter. It's done by Professor Ryan Reeves, who is I guess he's a professor primarily of church history. His lectures on the history of the early church are fantastic, and I can't recommend them highly enough. But 3 months ago, he put out a video on the origins of flat earth theory. And it's fascinating because it's actually a lot more recent than you would expect. The gist is, in the mid-19th century, when the Industrial Revolution was really kicking into full swing, Newtonian physics was just taking off, causing a revolution in science and physics and a belief in science. And along with that, there were on the fringes, there was a feeling that science would be a challenge to the legitimacy of the church and of faith. Now, the Catholic Church itself did not share this belief. The Catholic Church was, and has been for most of its entire life, promoters of and patrons of science. But this didn't stop a sort of progressive Christian socialist reaction, which was reacting equally to the Industrial Revolution and also to science. You had these sort of proto-communes, which Ryan Reeves actually points out Karl Marx was somewhat inspired by and spoke of favorably. But they were trying to establish a kind of communal Christian life outside of society proper. And within this context, within this subculture, this progressive Christian reaction to science and to the Industrial Revolution, we have this character named Samuel Burley Rowbotham. Now, Samuel Rowbotham was a bit of a huckster with a bit of a chip on his shoulder, but he seems to be the singular character responsible for, if not quite creating, then at least popularizing and promoting and disseminating flat Earth theory. And he did so in explicit reaction to Newtonian physics, which he claimed to hate, as Ryan Reeves put it, almost from birth. So a fascinating story, but it puts the whole question of the flat Earth conspiracy theory, and here I don't mean that in a dismissive sense, because we've seen in the past few years many conspiracy theories are in fact correct, more correct than the official stories. But here we're talking about an alleged conspiracy by the world of science and the powers that be to persuade the world that the Earth is actually round when it is flat. And they know it's flat. The fact that the belief that the Earth is flat is so recent as the 1850s and the 1860s, I think sheds and arose in this particular political context, is valuable information to remember and recognize when thinking about the flat Earth question. Now, logically, we can, of course, recognize that this kind of historical context doesn't by itself demonstrate the arguments are correct or incorrect. And we can recognize that while still taking it into account when we think about these subjects. So I don't think I have much more to say on it other than that questions like this are great practice for people who want to become more philosophical, to think about hard questions with a little bit more skill. And again, not just to waste your time with questions that you might argue don't matter, because like, what difference does it make if the Earth is round or flat? But again, it develops the skills of evaluating arguments and making arguments for those instances where maybe it does matter, that you're able to articulate yourself best. And also, it, as I've said in a few other podcasts, but I'll reiterate here, it makes the world a more interesting place. And it makes arguments that you find implausible, it makes them less annoying. And I will say, I feel less annoyed by people who I disagree with now than I did when I was in my early 20s. I was already fairly open back then, but when you reach a certain level of practice in asking these questions and attempting to answer them and taking them seriously, you begin to see positions that you don't agree with, like flat Earth, for example, less as a threat that turns your adrenal glands on and makes you defensive. And it puts you into the mindset of like a chess player who's evaluating a position and saying, what are my options here? And even to the point that if your opponent makes a skillful move, you can appreciate it as a skillful move and say, wow, what a move, what an argument there. And the openness actually makes the world a a bigger and more interesting and better place. And whether that betterment looks is expanded by making the world round or making it flatter and expanding out to infinity, I leave up to the audience here. But I just wanted to put this out. I don't think we need to spend any more time on it really, but I really hope I can at least change a few people's approach to the flat earth question and to other questions like the flat earth, which might include your views for for other people who are annoyed by the positions you hold. And wouldn't the world be an even better place then? So anyways, thanks for listening and take care.